George Gruhn, Gruhn Guitars, Nashville, Tennessee, here to talk about vintage instruments and new designs and virtually anything else that comes along. What we have here is a Fender Broadcaster model guitar made in the year 1950. Serial number right here, 0048. Now that sounds real impressive that it's a two-digit number, or basically 0048, but it doesn't necessarily mean it was the 48th broadcaster made. They stamped these bridge plates, a bunch of them at the same time. Then they threw them in a bin and would reach in sort of in a grab bag manner and use them so that they could keep track of the serial numbers for warranty purposes, but they really weren't consecutively numbered. Basically was only made in 50, because after that they got a cease and desist letter from an attorney, actually it was a telegram, representing Gretsch, because Gretsch had a broadcaster banjo and drum line. And Fender responded by, gee, rather than fighting a lawsuit, we'll just take the decals that have Broadcaster and Fender here and just take a scissor and just clip the Broadcaster name off and just leave Fender. And for a while they had them where they just said Fender until they came up with a new name, which was Telecaster. They came up with a Telecaster name in 1951, but for a few months they had them where they just said Fender. People today call those no-casters, but Fender literature didn't refer to them as no-casters, it was just the Fender. But at this time the model line for Fender of electric standard neck guitars rather than lap steels consisted of the Broadcaster and the Esquire, and that was it. There wasn't any Stratocaster or Music Master or Duosonic or any of that yet. So this is one of the first. It shows some wear, belt buckle wear. It shows finish wear on the edges, pretty typical Fender type wear. And also, as is common enough on Broadcasters, this sort of almost butterscotch blonde tends to flake and be brittle. They just hadn't really perfected their finishing quite yet. Sometimes it's just like they talk about cars, the first year of issue may be the most collectible one, but it's not necessarily the most utilitarian. It hasn't been fully debugged yet. And this one still is the real deal. And it's, as Fender electric guitar models go, there's hardly anything that's going to be more collectible than a Broadcaster, unless conceivably you can come up with the very, very few, one of the prototypes. So not a lot of these out there. There's no neck or body date on this. It's a very early one. But the tone and volume pots have a code which dates them to the 21st week of the year 1950. So we know that the guitar isn't going to be any older than that. When it comes down to collectability, this is one of the greatest of Fenders. So far as physical appearance, from the outside, does this look any different from a Telecaster? The answer is no. It looks just like the Tele, and in fact it just morphed into the Tele due to the threat of a lawsuit. But it's got the maple neck with the walnut back stripe and an adjustable rod. The prototypes before this and the Esquire before this, the early Esquire double pickup, had no back stripe, had no truss rod, and they warped. Kluson Deluxe single line tuners, spaghetti logo peghead decal, the round string tree rather than the butterfly clip later, single ply black guard. And the interesting thing is Fender seemed to think that everything needed a bridge cover. The first thing any player does today is they take this, what they call the ashtray, off, and they put it in the case if they don't just throw it away. And it's too bad if they throw it away, because it does add to the collectability to have it. But this is a great design as far as the pickup and the whole setup, but that ashtray stops you from damping the strings with the palm of your hand. But for years and years, Fender continued to make these, even though everyone took them off. And in fact, even the Stratocasters and Jazzmasters and Jaguars had a little metal thing also that clipped on their bridge. And everyone takes them off. And Leo still persisted in making these for the entire time that he was affiliated with Fender. Leo sold the company in January of '65, but for the entire period that Leo Fender was affiliated with Fender, and even going on for years afterward, they continued to make these things. But at any rate, when it comes down to collectability, historic importance, this model is one of the most important guitars in the entire history of electric guitars, because this is the first commercially successful solid body guitar ever made by any maker. Paul Bigsby made guitars that look similar in some ways, but they were actually semi-hollow, and it was a one-man operation. It was no big money in that. And Gibson didn't make solid body guitars till the Les Paul in '52, so this predates that by a couple of years. And Slingerland made solid body guitars that were in their catalog in the late '30s, but they weren't commercially successful. For one thing, they were a pretty primitive design, and for another thing, back then, they just didn't have amps that would kick butt and really drive a solid body guitar. See, people think of Leo as the great inventor of the first commercial, successful solid body electric guitar. In fact, also we can think of Audiovox back in the '30s in Seattle made solid body electric guitars and solid body fretted basses, but they were very, very tiny shop and commercially not successful. Leo made great amps. He originally was doing radio repairs during World War II when you couldn't buy a new radio, and the only way people could have a radio that worked was to keep it repaired. Leo had a radio repair shop, and it was a natural for him to go into making some amplifiers. And Leo was making amps every bit as early as his first lap steels. And what he did by the late '40s, even before he had designed the Broadcaster, is he had amps, like a deluxe amp, that would just absolutely kick ass. And if you plugged a solid body guitar into a Fender amp, you had a powerful instrument that could drive a complete band. In fact, prior to the electric solid bodies, the hollow body electrics typically didn't replace the big band sound. So it used to be if you did a dance, you had a 30-piece or a 20-piece group, or at least a 15-piece group. Once you had these, especially after '51, when he had an electric bass in the line and he had a Bassman amp and a deluxe amp for the guitar, you could take a 3- or 4-piece combo and you could make more noise than a 30-piece big band. And if you were doing a club, aside from the fact that it was the new fashion to have the combo, think of yourself as a club owner, given a choice of hiring a 30-piece band with a band director and this big entourage and buses and whatever, and having to pay all these union scale musicians versus get 4 schmoes with these things? Who are you going to hire? And this type guitar and the Fender amp made history. They changed history. Here we have it, 1950 Fender Broadcaster.